Police sirens pierced the stillness of the valley, cutting through the lingering morning mist that hovered above the lake. I had just finished driving the for sale sign into the ground when I noticed 3 squad cars making their way down the gravel road toward my property. And right behind HOA Karen, her blonde bob bounced with every indignant step, her clipboard clutched to her chest like it was a sheriff's badge. She stood behind the officers, pointing dramatically and shouting about some supposed community violation and illegal activity. One of the officers stepped out and approached me with a stern expression. "Sir," he said, "we've received a report that you're trying to sell land that's considered part of community property without approval." I stared at him for a moment. "Community property? This is my lake, on my land. I've owned it for over a decade." He raised a skeptical brow. "Well, she claims it falls under HOA jurisdiction." I looked right past him and locked eyes with Karen. She was wearing a smug little grin, as if she'd just claimed a victory. What she didn't know was that the game had already changed. Her mortgage had defaulted, and that very morning, I had bought her house at a foreclosure auction she didn't even know was happening, too stubborn and self-righteous to check the listing. By the time the next morning came around, she'd be staring at a locked gate at the end of her driveway with nowhere to go. But to understand how it came to this, let me back up a bit, because I wasn't always the type of guy who fought fire with fire. Before we go further, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because this story might just make you rethink every petty neighbor spat you've ever seen. My name's Richard Rick Carson. I'm 61, a retired Navy man, and the proud owner of 75 acres of rugged, untouched ranchland with a private lake tucked between Silver Creek and Maple Ridge. The land came from my grandfather, who built the old fishing cabin here with his own hands back in the 1940s. For years, this place was a peaceful refuge, birds singing, deer strolling by at sunrise. Simple, serene, mine, until the HOA showed up. It began with a few new homes on the southern edge of my property, and no big deal at first, but soon it snowballed. A couple houses turned into a whole development, and before long, the Maple Ridge HOA had sprawled across everything just beyond my southern fence line. One of their earliest board members, Karen Douglas, retired school principal in her 50s who suddenly discovered a new mission, enforcing her version of order and control on everyone around her, especially those who didn't fall under her rulebook. Now, let me make something clear: I don't live in that neighborhood. My land isn't inside their boundaries. But that didn't stop Karen from trying to reach beyond her limits. It started with courtesy notices in my mailbox about untidy land, native wildflowers I'd planted for pollinators, livestock in view, my cows, and non-approved vehicles, my tractor. I ignored her, figured she'd lose interest and move on. That was a mistake. One morning, I found a cluster of home members just beyond my fence, phones out, snapping photos of my dock. "This lake poses a risk to the community," Karen said smugly. "We're filing a formal complaint." "A risk to who?" I asked. "To our residents," she snapped. "Your water line comes too close to our backyards." I shot back, "Then maybe you shouldn't have built those cookie-cutter homes so close to my property." That was when the tone changed. Soon after, county code enforcement started showing up unannounced. I began receiving violation notices, one for a rotting boathouse that wasn't rotting, and another for a collapsed fence post that had fallen during a storm. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was making the phone calls. Karen was escalating. Now, I don't go looking for trouble, but I won't let anyone push me around either. When a tech company from Austin reached out with an offer to buy a portion of my lakefront for a glamping retreat, eco-friendly, quiet, respectful of nature, and they offered me 7 figures, I said yes. It wasn't about the money. I saw it as a buffer, something to keep Karen and her self-righteous squad from creeping any closer. But when she saw the for sale sign go up, she lost it, accused me of turning the land into a public safety issue, claimed I had no right to sell shared natural resources, even though she had no title, no legal grounds, and not a shred of evidence to support her claims. And that's when she called the police. Which brings us back to that morning, lights flashing, accusations flying, and a woman who truly believed she ruled the entire valley. But what still makes me shake my head, while she was playing hero in front of the cops, Her own house was being auctioned off due to unpaid HOA fees and a second mortgage she secretly took out to fund a failed flower shop business. My attorney called me and said, "Rick, you're not going to believe HOA Karen's house is listed dirt cheap. I bought it, in full, cash, through a trust." And when she found out, that's when things really took a turn. The following morning, I was sipping black coffee on my porch from my favorite chipped mug when the familiar roar of Karen's SUV echoed down the gravel drive. She blasted past my no trespassing signs, dust flying, tires half on my lawn, and came to a screeching halt. She stormed out, waving paperwork. "You think you can sell a lake without my permission?" she shrieked. I took another sip. "Good morning, Karen," I said. "I hear you've called an emergency HOA board meeting." "Last night, we held an emergency board meeting. We're issuing a cease and desist," she snapped, thrusting the papers toward me like they carried legal weight. I glanced down at the official-looking documents, stamped with the HOA's logo as if that meant anything to me. "I'm not part of your HOA, Karen. Never have been, never will be." Her eyes narrowed. "You might not be on our registry, but your actions are impacting our shared environment." That's when I let out a laugh. "Karen, this isn't an 8th grade science fair. This is private property, and your little fief demands where your sidewalk does." She looked like she might combust on the spot. Before she could unleash her next tirade, I added calmly, "Also, just a heads up, your gate might not work tomorrow." She blinked, confused. "What? Why wouldn't it?" "You'll find out," I said, turning my back on her and heading inside. She stood there, mouth hanging open, hands clenched at her sides, seething. But while she was out here playing pretend law enforcer, I had something much more powerful than HOA stationery tucked away. I had the title to her house sitting safely in my gun safe. Let me explain how that came to be. Turns out Karen had refinanced her property twice. First, to build a custom greenhouse out back, then again when her boutique flower shop didn't pan out, but she never caught up on either of those loans. On top of that, her own HOA had filed liens against her, something about misusing community funds for improvement projects that just so happened to benefit her own yard. Eventually, the county seized the home and quietly posted it for auction online, at sunrise the very same day she was dialing the police on me. My lawyer Max gave me a call. "Rick, I've got something odd but legit. Karen's house is up for auction, sheriff's sale, and you're the only bidder." "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. "You're not going to believe I'd broken bar $72,000. To give you context, her home was worth closer to $400,000. It had all the bells and whistles: a wine cellar, solar panels, and a backyard that backed onto a private path. But due to a loophole in the sheriff's auction process, all I had to do was wire the payment, and the property was legally mine. Put it under Silver Oak Trust," I told him. No hesitation. That was the moment everything shifted. From the neighbor she thought she could control, I became the legal owner of the house she thought she ruled. And then came the cherry on top. While reviewing the original land surveys, I discovered something interesting. Karen's driveway passed over a sliver of land behind my cattle fence. That strip, as it turned out, had never been parceled off from my great-grandfather's deed. For 15 years, she'd been using the driveway under the false belief it was hers. It wasn't, which meant the only access to her house now passed directly through land I owned. That evening, I made a call to my ranch hand. "Tommy, bring the big gates," I said. "The steel ones with the combo lock." "You sure?" he asked. "Absolutely." The next morning, while Karen was sipping her organic tea and posting self-righteous updates in her HOA group chat, my team was hard at work. By noon, a 12-foot steel gate was installed across the narrow drive that ran behind her loda on my land, now fully fenced and secured. By lunchtime, she found the lock. By early afternoon, she was on the phone with the police again. But this time, the response didn't go the way she expected. The officers didn't show up at my place. They headed straight to hers. "Ma'am," one of them said calmly while she ranted at them, "we've reviewed the property records. You no longer own this residence." "What are you talking about?" "That's impossible," she shrieked. "The property was sold this morning in a legal sheriff's auction. You're no longer the registered owner." Karen looked like the ground had dropped out beneath her feet. Boot to broken bar. I didn't sign anything. I'm still living here. That's a matter between you and the new owner. She turned slowly, eyes narrowing, staring up toward my porch like she already knew the truth. And there I was, same old mug in hand, watching the chaos unfold like I was enjoying the final act of a courtroom drama. She came storming up the hill, fists clenched, tears beginning to sting her eyes. "Did you do this?" I didn't answer immediately, just nodded toward the gate behind her. "You should probably move your car before it's stuck inside permanently." "You're evil," she hissed. "No," I replied. I just finally stood up, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little satisfied. After all her power plays, her attempts to bully and control, and she didn't own she couldn't so much as leave her house without my permission now. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. That night, around 2 a.m., I noticed movement on one of my security feeds. Someone had crept up to the gate behind her house, dressed in dark clothes, gloved, holding bolt cutters. They didn't know the cameras had night vision, or that the gate had a silent alarm. And they definitely didn't know I was already awake, watching a broken bar with the sheriff on speed dial. The moment I saw the shadowy figure crouching near the gate, I knew exactly who it was. Karen, still in her robe, eyes wild, looking like someone trapped in a nightmare of her own making. Only it wasn't a dream. This was real, and it was all her doing. She stood there, clutching bolt cutters, pacing like she couldn't decide if she should follow through. Then, in a burst of frustration, she clamped down on the lock. Nothing. She tried again, putting all her weight into it, grunting through clenched teeth. Still nothing. That lock, industrial grade. She wasn't getting through it. The lock was the industrial kinda, the same type used on shipping containers. I didn't budge from my chair, just took another slow sip of my coffee. Yes, I drink it at night sometimes. Helps me think. Without hurry, I tapped Sheriff Dunley's contact. He picked up on the second ring. "Rick," he said. "Evening, Sheriff. Might want to swing by. Karen's out here again. It looks like she's trying to break into her own house this time. Came prepared, too. She's got tools." "On our way," he replied without missing a beat. 10 minutes later, the red and blue glow lit up the ridge like a Christmas tree. Karen must have seen the lights, too, because she stumbled back like she just touched a live wire, bolting toward her porch like a spooked animal caught in the compost bin. But it was too late. The deputies were already pulling up her driveway. They stepped out with flashlights and calm authority, calling her name. Once, then again. Karen, trying to act casual, waved a hand like she just stepped out for some air. "Ma'am," one deputy said, "we've reviewed the footage." "I wasn't trying to cut anything," she snapped, eyes wild. "I just wanted to leave for work tomorrow." "You can't trap me in my own home." "This property," the deputy said firmly, "is no longer registered in your name. The gate is on private land. Tampering with security infrastructure is a criminal offense." Karen let out a sharp, broken laugh, a mix of rage and disbelief. "I built this house. Every flower bed, every wall. How does it belong to him now?" That's when I walked down from my porch, hands tucked in my pockets. "Calm, quiet. I warned you, Karen," I said. "You kept pushing." "You're doing this to punish me." I shrugged. "You brought the hoe. You brought law enforcement. You brought the bureaucracy. All I did was follow the same rules you weaponized." Just then, Sheriff Dunley arrived. He stepped out of his SUV, hat low, voice lower. "Karen, you've got 72 hours to vacate. You can challenge it in court if you want. But until then, you're technically trespassing on someone else's property." "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "You don't have a choice," the sheriff replied flatly. "The deed's already transferred." She turned to me, mascara smudged, eyes brimming. "You don't understand what you've done." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. 3 days ago, I was just a quiet neighbor with a few cattle and a worn-out porch swing. Now I was the legal owner of the house belonging to the woman who used to call me an eyesore. But the real storm hadn't hit yet. The next day, I got a letter in the mail, a thick envelope, corporate seal. It was from the Maple Ridge HOA's legal team. A full-blown lawsuit. Cease and desist all activities that negatively impact the welfare, mobility, and quality of life of HOA board member Karen Douglas. Failure to comply may result in community-wide sanctions, condemnation evaluations, boundary revision petitions, and the restriction of your property from future sale or development. I reread that line twice, condemnation evaluations. I actually laughed out loud. They were threatening my land now, land that had been in my family for 4 generations. They thought buying one house made me vulnerable? They had no idea. 2 hours later, I was back on the phone with Max. They're threatening condemnation, I said. He snorted. Rick, they'd need the county board, an environmental survey, proof of public benefit, and about 2 years of hearings to even get started. It's smoke and mirrors. But could they try? They can try. And if they do, we hit them so hard, HO becomes a 4-letter word they're scared to say. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the still lake beyond the fence line. The ducks glided along peacefully, blissfully unaware of the battle lines being drawn. I want to go on a fence, I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Max said, you want the nuclear option? I want them to know who they're dealing with. Done. And that's when we pulled the pin. You see, what Karen and her entire HO committee didn't know was this. Their neighborhood's only access road cut through a stretch of my eastern pasture. Always had. Years ago, they paved over it, assuming it was community land. Never signed an easement. No formal right-of-way, just assumptions. And assumptions don't hold up in court. 3 days later, while Karen scrambled to pack up her belongings and her neighbors whispered behind curtains, I had a fencing crew marking out the pasture line. Then we started construction on a 10-foot-high wooden barrier property edge to edge. The first section went up just before noon. By 12:15, my phone rang. It was Karen. How dare you block off the only road into Maple Ridge? She screamed. It's not your road, I said. It never was. You'll destroy the whole neighborhood. I smiled. Funny, that's exactly what you tried to do to me. You said you wanted to preserve it, I told Hira, and then hung up. I was done talking. What I didn't know then was that fences and legal threats were only the beginning. Karen wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And this time, she wouldn't come with lawyers. She'd come with backup. 2 nights after construction began on the wall, I saw the lights. 6 sets of headlights climbing the ridge road like a slow-moving pack of wolves. It was past midnight. I was on the porch again. Same old rocking chair. Same rifle resting by my side like it had been every night since this mess started. But this wasn't just Karen anymore. It was the entire Maple Ridge HO board. They stepped out of their luxury cars, one by Onia, some in suits, others in pajamas and bathrobes. A bizarre, suburban parade. At the front stood Douglas Hartwell, the HO president, tall, tidy, and holding a megaphone like he was leading a press conference. He marched up to the pasture gate and raised his voice. Mr. Carson, he called, we respectfully demand you halt construction. You are endangering the welfare of over 70 families. I didn't move, just leaned against the porch rail. I'm not obstructing anything, I replied. I'm building a wall on my land. You're violating mutual community interest. He barked through the megaphone. You're cutting off emergency access. That access was never yours, I said flatly. That road was a cattle trail laid down by my great-granddad. You paved over it without asking. That ends now. Karen stepped forward, pale and shaking. He's doing this to destroy me. No, Karen, I said calmly. You destroyed yourself. I just drew the line where there should have been one all along. The board started shouting over one another, some yelling legal threats, others trying to calm the situation. I didn't flinch. I'm open to discussing an easement, I said, but only after you drop the lawsuit, issue a public apology for trespassing, harassment, and defamation. That shut them up. Silence fell. Then Karen exploded. We are not apologizing to him. He swooped in like a vulture and bought my house. A man near the back mumbled, "Carring a broken bar, we didn't even know about your liens." Another whispered, "We told you not to push this far." And just like that, the unity cracked. Right there at my fence line, the HO began to fracture. "You made this personal," one woman snapped. "We were supposed to be protecting the community." He offered a deal. Someone else said, "We should take it before home values tank." Karen's face twisted in fury. He trapped me, but no one was listening anymore. Then she dropped the megaphone and stormed into the woods beside the fence, sobbing and shouting, "This isn't over. I swear it's not over. She vanished into the darkness. No one followed her. The rest of the board slowly backed away. Some offered apologies. A few said they'd call their lawyers. Then they got back into their cars and disappeared down the ridge road. For a minute, I thought that might be the end of it. I should have known better. The next morning, I found blood on the barn door. Not old rust, not animal blood afresh. A thick smear, painted into a strange spiral with a harsh line slashed through it. Underneath, carved into the wood with what looked like a key or a nail, were the words, "You took everything, now watch it burn." I stood there, the morning sun just touching the lake, pulse thudding in my ears. Someone had come onto my land in the night. They had stood just feet from my horses, my barn, my home. This wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was something darker. I checked the gates and nothing broken. Checked the animals and not a scratch. But that spiral, a broken bar, I recognized it. Karen used to wear it on a necklace. She once told me it was an old symbol passed down from her grandmother, part of some spiritual belief. Peaceful then and now twisted into a threat. I walked back up to the porch, pulled out my phone, and called Max. "We need to file a restraining order," I said. "You sure about that?" I glanced back at the spiral, still wet with blood. "Oh, I'm sure." By noon, the paperwork was filed. The restraining order went through. Sheriff Dunley delivered it himself to Karen's temporary motel down the highway. Meanwhile, movers I'd hired were clearing out her house, packing everything into boxes marked unclaimed until verified. It was messy, but I didn't stick around to watch. I had other plans. I called the Austin Glamping Company, the same folks who had once shown interest in the lakefront. I told them the land was back on the table. They were thrilled. "Can we add kayaking?" The rep asked. "Go for it." "Horseback rides?" "Sure." "A yoga platform?" "Knock yourself out." And just like that, construction began illegally, officially, and fully within zoning regulations. Permits filed, crews hired, equipment delivered. The noise traveled fast to hammers, trucks, engines echoing across the ridge and right into Maple Ridge's peace and quiet fantasy. For a neighborhood so obsessed with tranquility, the sound of progress was unbearable. Karen, of course, didn't take it quietly. 3 days later, something exploded. One of my pasture gates was blown off its hinges, ripped apart by what turned out to be a homemade pipe bomb. Security cameras caught everything. Karina, dressed in black, gloves on, half her face hidden behind the scarf, was clearly visible in the moonlight. Eyes blazing, she emerged from the trees, raised her arm, and tossed the device over the cattle fence. A few seconds later, a low boom echoed across the valley. Cedar splinters flew through the night like shrapnel. No one was hurt, thank God. But that didn't matter anymore. This wasn't just trespassing, it was criminal. It was war. I sent the footage to Sheriff Dunley immediately. When he showed up, I handed him the tablet. He stared at the screen in stunned silence, his jaw tight, his thumb pressed to his chin. "She's really gone off the deep end," he muttered. "You going to arrest her?" He nodded. No more warnings. 2 hours later, Karen Douglas was in cuffs. They picked her up right in front of Maple Ridge's community gardena, the same one she used to brag about like it was her legacy. Neighbors watched from porches and sidewalks as she screamed, "He ruined my life." While being led into the back of a cruiser, I stood nearby, silent. She locked eyes with me through the tinted window. "You don't get to win, Rick," she shouted. This isn't the end, but it was, for her, at least. And for the first time in months, I let myself exhale. The story blew up overnight. Local headlines read, "HOA Vice Chair Arrested in Ranch Bombing Plot." Even the town Facebook page lit up with comments. She had it coming. This is what happens when power goes unchecked. Always knew there was something off about her. Meanwhile, the rest of the HOA board was in full damage control. Douglas Hartwell, the president, called me personally. "Mr. Carson, a broken bar. We had no idea how far she'd go." I didn't say much. "We want to meet," he continued, "figure out how to make peace." "Peace starts with accountability," I said. "You let her run wild. That's on all of you." He hesitated, then added, "We're dissolving the board." Several members resigned. "We're holding a vote to return power to the homeowners." I blinked. "You serious?" "Dead serious." I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Not with the dust still settling. Because even with Karen locked up and the HOA unraveling, Something still felt a broken bar wrong. A week later, I was out by the far pasture when I noticed tire tracks, fresh ones. They didn't belong to my truck, and none of my workers had driven through that part of the property. The tracks cut through the brush and near the back trail that ran behind Maple Ridge, an old service path few people knew about. I followed them. They curved through a line of trees and ended at a rusted-out storage shed. It had been there for years, left behind by some old gas company. Everyone had forgotten about it. Everyone except someone, because the shed wasn't empty. When I pried open the shed door, the smell of smoke hit me first. Inside, I found candles burned down to their stubs, scorch marks on the dirt floor, an old radio scanner, and a binder thick with papers. Not ordinary HOA records. These were the private meeting minutes, the kind they never intended neighbors to see. In the back of the binder was a printed map of my property. Red X's marked the lake, my fences, and oddly my barn. One note read, Phase 2, remove obstruction. Another, Phase 3, file ownership claim. My hands clenched the folder. This hadn't just been Karen's vendetta, it had been a coordinated effort, something the HOA had been quietly scheming for months. I called Max. As I read him the notes, his tone shifted. "Rick," he said, "you're sitting on a lawsuit the size of Texas." But I wasn't thinking about money. "I don't want to sue," I said. "I want to expose them." And just like that, the plan changed. We compiled every document, every secret minute, every map, every illegal note. Then we went to the press. A week later, the entire county woke up to a front-page bombshell. HOA secretly plotted to seize private ranch. Leaked documents reveal targeted campaign. News crews rolled up my driveway. Reporters interviewed me by the lake. When they asked what came next, I told them simply, "I'm turning this land into something good for the town, for the kids, veterans, seniors, anyone who needs peace." People applauded. For once, things felt right. But then, 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, just a legal envelope and one sheet of paper. 5 words, centered, typed in bold. "She's out on bail." I froze. Karen was free and no one knew where she'd gone. I called Sheriff Dunley immediately. "She's out?" I asked, pacing my porch, fingers tight around the rail. He let out a slow breath. "Yeah, Rick." Her lawyer filed an emergency bail motion, cited mental health treatment, community roots, no history of violence. Judge bought it. Strict conditions, though. "What conditions?" "She can't leave the county, GPS ankle monitor, and she's barred from coming within 500 feet of you or your land." I exhaled, but the relief was hollow. "She doesn't need to come here to cause trouble. She can send people. She can wait. If she makes one move," Dunley said, "she's going back in. No second chances." I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me this wasn't over. I tightened security, more cameras, motion lights, even hired a night guard, Eli, a local vet who just lost his job at the feed store. Good man, loyal, steady. Still, every night, I felt it, like eyes were watching, like something was just beyond the tree line. Then came the strange things. First, a water line near the barn was cut clean through. My repair guy said it wasn't an accident. No animal did that. It looked deliberate, precise. Then one of my horses started acting strange, refusing to go near the lower fence. Snorting, stomping, ears back, like it sensed something was wrong. And then I found the second note, placed under my front doormat, folded neatly. "No envelope. This ranch will be mine, one way or another." No doubt now Karen hadn't moved on. She doubled down. Max was furious. "This is turning into a damn horror movie," he snapped. "We're not waiting for her to strike again." He filed an emergency motion, an expanded restraining order, plus a request for 24-hour patrols citing the repeated threats, property damage, and the still unfolding HOA conspiracy. Meanwhile, Maple Ridge was in chaos. The HOA had officially collapsed. Residents were panicking, and no board, no rules, no leadership. Home values tanked. What was once a manicured suburban utopia was now a neighborhood in free fall. And Karen? She was out there somewhere, watching, planning, and I knew deep down, She wasn't finished yet. The lakeside development only made things worse for the folks in Maple Ridge. Buyers who once craved peace and privacy started panicking. Some began coming to me. "Mr. Carson, can we talk about forming a new kind of community agreement? Rick, would you consider helping us build a better home? One with real accountability?" A few even offered caution just to regain access to the old road. I listened, politely but firmly. "I don't want power," I told them. "I just want peace." And for a little while, I got it. The glamping cabins were going up. Weekend bookings started rolling in. I even partnered with a group of local teachers to launch summer nature camps for kids. It finally felt like the ranch was healing, until the package arrived. No name, no return address, just a plain cardboard box, dropped off by a teenage courier who said it was from someone in town. I opened it on the porch. Inside was a photograph burnt around the edges. It was the picture that used to hang in my hallway. Me and my dad, fishing off the dock when I was 10. The original had gone missing months ago. I'd chalked it up to renovation chaos. But now here it was, a charred and returnito with a single matchstick beneath it. The message was clear. She had been inside my home. I felt sick. Eli and I swept the property. Every lock was untouched, every window sealed. But that didn't matter. Che or someone she sent had gotten in. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my old recliner, shotgun across my lap, eyes on the dark windows. At 3:15 a.m., the motion sensor by the barn went off. Eli was already moving. We bolted outside, flashlights slicing through the fog. Near the rear pasture stood a figure in a long coat, hood pulled up, facing the lake, completely still. "Hey!" Eli shouted. No response. "Hands where I can see them," I added, stepping forward. The figure turned slowly. It wasn't Karen. It was her cousin Lyle, an ex-con she'd once mentioned in passing, her family that handles business. He smiled like we were old friends at a reunion. "You're trespassing," Eli barked. "Just out for a walk," Lyle said, grinning. 3 in the morning, on private land. "You see any signs?" "I don't see any bars either," he smirked. "You're about to," I said. Sheriff Dunley showed up 10 minutes later. Lyle didn't resist. He was cuffed on the spota carrying a knife, bolt cutters, and a lighter. His phone had recent texts from Karen. "Just scare him, leave a mark, make it quiet." That was it. The final straw. The sheriff's office moved fast. A judge revoked her bail. Karen was arrested again, this time for conspiracy, intimidation, and violating a court order. They dragged her out of the motel lobby in handcuffs. Neighbors watched from their balconies. Some even clapped. Just before the squad car door slammed shut, she turned and screamed one last time, "You'll never be rid of me, Rick." "Never." I watched the cruiser disappear down the road. Eli turned to me. "You think that's the end of it?" I shook my head. "But it's the beginning of my ending." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done playing defense. It's time I finish this, because if Karen thinks this land war is over, she's wrong, and if she thinks she's seen all my cards a broken bar." I trailed off, already thinking about what came next. The next morning, I woke to silence, the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when everything's too still, like the land itself is holding its breath. Karen was back in jail. Lyle was facing charges. And for the first time in months, I heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and the call of a hawk overhead. But I wasn't fooled. The real damage wasn't just to fences or barns. Karen had stirred something deeper. My peace, my home, my sense of safety. And I wasn't done yet. Even my memories weren't safe. That charred photo of me and my daughter, burned, bent, but still intact, sat on the table like a reminder. We'd been damaged, but not destroyed, just like this ranch, just like me. So, I got to work, not to fight anymore. That part was over. The courts would handle Karen now. What I focused on was building something better, something that would last. I called the tech company and laid out my vision. We'd expand the lake project, but on our terms. Walking trails, a veterans lodge, an outdoor classroom for local schools, and a small museum honoring the ranch's 100-year history. They said yes. Within weeks, surveyors, contractors, and environmental consultants were walking the land respectfully. Every design choice kept the ranch's character intact: rustic, humble, and shaded by old trees. And then a broken bar people started to arrive. At first, just curious visitors, city folks who'd read about the host and often wanted to see the place that had made headlines. Then came more retirees, veterans, teachers, even a few former Maple Ridge residents who quietly sold their homes and moved into tiny cabins along the ridge, tired of the chaos Karen had left behind. They started calling it the Reclaimed Ridge. And for the first time in a long time, the land was alive again. Kids ran barefoot down the lake trail. Neighbors passed around home-cooked food under the oak trees. Guitar music drifted from the fire pit at sunset. That was the future I had fought for. Not just freedom from HOA tyranny, but freedom to live without fear. One afternoon, a man in a suit showed up at my gate. He wasn't the sheriff or a lawyer, he was a real estate developer. Carl Peterson. Nice suit, polished pitch. He handed me a card and said his firm was scouting the area. "We'd like to buy," he said, "the whole Carson Ranch." I raised an eyebrow. "Why now?" "The story caught national attention," he said. "We want to build a destination, capitalize on the name." He slid a folded paper across the gate. An offer. I didn't even look at the number. "No deal," I said flatly. "Are you sure? Everyone has a price." I gave him a slow smile. Mine was already in blood, stress, and barbed wire. "I'm not selling peace." He left. Back on the porch, Eli was tightening a loose screen. He looked up and said, "You really turned this place around." I shook my head. "I didn't turn it around, I just protected what was already good." That night, I lit a fire in the outdoor pit and sat with neighbors, some new, some old, all of us changed by what we'd survived. Karen was still in jail, awaiting trial. The charges were serious. She might be gone for years, a broken bar or longer, but even if she wasn't, I was ready, because what started as a battle with an HOA had become something much bigger. It was about standing your ground when no one else will, about defending the places and people that matter, and about remembering that bullies, no matter how loud, connected, or powerful, always fall when truth holds firm. Then came the final twist. A month later, I got one last letter, postmarked from the county jail. No name, but I recognized the handwriting. "I thought I could break you. I thought I owned everything, but you owned something I never had. Respect. You won. Goodbye." I folded it carefully, a broken bar, then tossed it into the fire. Not out of hate, but to let it go, because sometimes peace doesn't come from fighting back, it comes from finishing well. And on this ranch, after everything we'd been through, that's exactly what we finally had. Peace.